HaKadosh Baruch Hu hates depression, indifference, and ignorance. This evening I'm going to talk about ignorance. Not in general, in particular, my ignorance. Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. The first verb in the Chumash text is the word bara, created. I'm not concerned tonight at all with giving an explanation of the Bereshit, what that means, what the word bara means in the lexical sense. It means create, what kind of create, and so on. As you know, there were three words in the story, in the narrative. There was bara, yatzar, and asa. Three different words for making. And I talked about that in a different context. But tonight, I want to focus attention on something else. Bara, the first verb. Okay? We have to talk English, so we say, strictly speaking, Bereshit bara Elokim. The verb is coming before Elokim, but in English and in Greek and so forth, in the Greek Septuagint, it's theos, God. So that the first word is theos and not thing. And of course, Chazal fasted because they realized that the language shift to Greek was necessary because of the situation of the Jews at the time, Alexandria and whatever it was, but the whole text was completely messed up by the translation. And as you'll see tonight, my ignorance came from following the tradition and how they understood the text. Bara, God created, so we'll put the God first. And Elokim created. That's the translation. How do you say had created in Hebrew?
Hayabara?
Ain't no word. There ain't no word. In English we have, he did something, he had done, or he has done, and so on. We have I think they call it past perfect, or whatever it is.
Past perfect.
Whatever it is in the English thing. But in this text, every verb in the text has the two meanings. Either it means the past tense, he created, bing, or he had created. What's the difference? You'll say, well, look, what are you're chopping wood here. It's semantic. The message is something happened. Kadosh Baruch Hu created. That's the message. That's not quite true. What is the difference between the two? Between created, which could be any word throughout the text, created or had created.
It's easy.
What's it?
It happened. If it had created, it happened before some other event.
That's not the essential point. That's true, but the same thing happened when you write he created. It happened before some other event. To make it short to the point, when you say had created, you're looking at the text from the present now. And so you're in effect saying what was done then continues. It continues. If you want to say it was done and over with, you say he created. And if the person is interested, he could ask a question. What happened before, what this, all kinds of questions about what happened, about the event. But that has to come from the person. Here, the grammar disallows the person to raise the question from himself. It built into the grammar is the significance of this act, of what happened. So, every single verb in the Chumash is amenable to a decision by the reader when you want to say he created, he walked, he swam, or when you want to say he had swam, or swum, whatever it is.
Not had, has.
So the point is, the first point is to realize that this is the case. Why do I say ignorance? My ignorance. Look how many years we're working on the same pasuk. Everybody knows, Bereshit bara Elokim. I wrote a 950-page perush on the Chumash, and I never even entered my head that there was this difference. So the text is telling you, when it's translated into English, it said, Bereshit bara Elokim, God created the beginning, and created the heaven and the earth. Okay, so I took the emphasis to be created. I was interested to understand what happened and how it happened and whatever. So from inside me came a barrage of questions, which have spent a lifetime working on those questions and trying to teach them and get across points, get feedback, and so on and so on. Okay, but the basic translation that I used was the translation in English. English has the other locution. It has the notion of had been. Has been, had been, and something. This is in between the two, whatever it is, but they had the variation. But nevertheless, in the language, they didn't use the variation. You look at the German text, you look at the Danish text, you look at the Hebrew text, you look at the French text, all the translations are taking the verb in the one form. And since in Hebrew there is no special word, therefore the concept was there. They had the idea, and it was fundamental, as I'll show you right away. But they didn't have a word. Therefore, it's built into the word, which means the reader, to get the message, must make a decision on each time it says the word. Right off the bat, we need a new translation of the text. Before we even go further, to give you other illustrations of different type which lead to the same conclusion, we're studying Chumash, working on the text, and we're working, not catching the fullness of what's going on. The point being, it's not just semantic. It fits the whole pattern of thinking and understanding that's built into the ancient Near Eastern text, which is called the Chumash, or Torah. I don't even use the word Torah because we're not talking about Torah. We're talking about an ancient Near Eastern text, which, as far as I'm concerned, does not have any status of Torah until Ezra put the status of Torah on it, and then it entered into Judaism. Judaism has nothing whatsoever to do with the text, except when the text was incorporated. Should I put it the other way around? The text has nothing to do with Judaism. When the 5 books of Moses was incorporated with the other part of Tanakh into the Chazal's understanding and structure, which was Torah Shebiktav and Torah Shebal Peh and so on and so on, then and only then, as far as I'm concerned, it became Torah. Until then, it was an ancient Near Eastern text, and when the scholarship for 200 years have been studying the text, Judaism is never afraid of historical inquiry, linguistic inquiry, and history, and so forth. But when they studied it, we're not afraid. But they got so many boo-boos, so many mistakes that grew up in opposition to the study of the text as an ancient Near Eastern text. I found out through my study as a Torah person, unless you study and catch the text in the proper way, you can't ask the question, how was it incorporated into Chazal? Judaism is based on Chazal. Whatever you hear from me, no, as far as I'm concerned, Judaism is based on the Gemara, on Chazal. And if you find things that don't fit, one has to have an explanation without apologetics. And if they made a mistake on some empirical thing, they made a mistake on an empirical thing. When they said that the fetus, for example, at 40 days, until 40 days has a din of water, of nothing, so that in the halachic system for up to 40 days. That's not true. That's not true. Well, we're dealing with halacha now. We're dealing with a legal system. If the legal system says it's 40 days, it doesn't have to be a fact. That's the concept that's involved in measurement. 40 days is a big number in the whole Chazal picture, and therefore it's not, the statement is not an assertion that's true or false, that's to be taken literally or not. The statement is part of a legal structure.
This is interfering with the whole system here.
I'm so bad on these things.
You have to answer them, huh?
I don't know.
Just to leave it.
You just have to leave it. I'm sorry.
But can I ask a question? When you say 40 days is water, you mean the fetus, the embryo,
right.
is for the first 40 days of pregnancy is considered as water, and therefore can be flushed out. Yes?
Whatever the halachas are, but what I'm trying to say is that when there are factual discrepancies.
No, well, I was trying to get the halacha.
No, but the halacha is that it has water. It has no status as if something happens to the mother or something, whatever the different circumstances are, whatever it is. I don't think it has any status whatsoever about.
And where do we find
there's no burial. If there's a fetus, and if it's born, for example, within the thing, it's not considered anything. There's no sitting shiva. There's no burial.
Because 40 days after it's born, you mean? I'm trying to figure out which one.
After conception.
After conception.
After conception. And so where do we learn this from?
Whatever. I don't know the din. I'm just telling you. That's I'm only indicating.
Never heard of this.
I'm only indicating. Okay. I'm only indicating that the halachic system has its own conceptual structure and unity, and when it comes to measurements, it has a system of measurements, and in many cases, this disagrees with the reality. However, one can note the disagreement, as I just did, without disturbing the system. The system says, look, this is how we're working. Okay, we're not making a history report or an embryological analysis, and so therefore the thing stands. The main point being that Chazal is not afraid of truth that comes in from non-Jews, right, and from history, archaeology, and so forth. When there's a contradiction, it's better to say, from any point of view, well, I don't quite catch why they did this, and if they were in a historical or a factual context, they're wrong, period. That's the end of the story. That doesn't mean you can throw the system over. You can throw it at any time. But the point is, that's not the problem. The problem is, here's the text as it is. Okay, so I discovered that in each number of years, there was a reconstruction, shall we say, a reconceptualization of knowledge. In Moshe Rabbeinu, like Chaim Scheff says, there's a reconstruction. He inherited a lot of material in terms of observation and understanding the life system and so on and so on and so on, organized it into a structure, and a lot of the stuff was cross-cultural, and put out a reorganization of the universe, okay, of the knowledge. The next big one was the prophets. 800 BCE, in the time of the monarchy, the prophets took and inherited the writings, whatever was available that came through Moshe Rabbeinu, either by oral or by written, makes no difference at the point, and they reorganized at their time the knowledge. So included in their reorganization was the inheritance of the text. However, it happens, as they reconstructed the knowledge, the original points and subtlety and understanding that was in the ancient Near Eastern texts got lost, was covered over by a different orientation, namely a theologization of the text. Became, before, in Moshe, the basic point was a system of understanding and a system of action built on what I call life energy, the life process. Life was the organizing principle of everything. I call it life energy because I want to eventually later bring in the scientific picture, and we're going to have to talk about what that is. In every book on healing, you take Barbara Brennan, you take famous world-renowned people, you read the Tibetan Book of the Dead and other materials from the Orient, they use the word life energy. She uses it directly. Some say life force. So somebody asks me all the time, Freddie isn't here, he used to say, well, what are you talking about? Mm-hmm. It's not energy in the physics picture. But I call it energy, life energy, because it has to fit somehow, co-join what we discovered in terms of quantum and relativity, which deals with a different understanding of energy. So there are two energies. Now what the second one is, we don't know, and I don't know, and I tell the reader over and over again, I don't know. Just like in the healing book, they'll use the word, but they're not explaining. And when they do explain, it's all apologetic and not empirical, doesn't give the reader enough to hold on. Okay, so there was a reconceptualization of knowledge in which life remained, but as the property of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. The fundamental property, characteristic of God, of Hashem, whatever the name, I'm not going into that tonight, but that remained, Kayin remained, oh yes. But it was mediated by a theological veneer. And what has come down when the next reconstruction of knowledge came about was Chazal. In particular, after the construction of the first temple. And so in that construction, what they inherited was already Chumash one step removed. Because what happened in that prophetic reconstruction? They entered the text. They took the text of an ancient Near Eastern text and they milked it for ideas and conceptions and aspects that fit the new organizational structure that they were putting on it, which is a religion structure, a theological structure. And what's come down as Judaism, when Chazal inherited it, was this. I say, my contention is, that's not quite true. They did have the new picture that was from the king, Shlomo HaMelech, David HaMelech, and the Nevi'im. However, they still kept vestiges of the original Moses text as an ancient Near Eastern text before it never even had the status of Torah. So I'm suggesting, and I suggested many times, and I wrote a book on the topic to illustrate to the reader that we have to enter the world of Chazal, both in the Halacha and in the Agadah and the Midrash. We have to enter the material saying, maybe there are vestiges of the original text, and if we will look for it, yours truly says we will find it. And I wrote this book, 150 pages, whatever it is, to give, I had about 25, 30 Chazal, and I milked the reader and said, look, when you see this piece of thing in the Gemara or in a Midrash, this is what you're supposed to ask. I told them what to ask. Never mind that we got it pat. Look at all the great people that worked on the tradition, that worked on the Gemara, on the Agaritas, and so on and so on. Don't assume that we've got the whole picture. Let's say, okay, you got the whole picture? Don't worry, you're going to destroy Judaism. You're not going to destroy Judaism. Inquire, make the inquiry. After you make the inquiry and you come up zero, then we'll talk about what we do. My contention is that if we will look for it with a new flashlight, we will find it. And when the Kabbalah later came into the picture, many of the points that I make and have made will be found to be in the Kabbalah systematic that was developed later. And there was a Perush on Sefer Yetzirah and so on, and that got into the post-Newtonian Kabbalah of the Vilna Gaon, the Ramchal, and Reb Nachman of Breslov. These are the three greats that have carried all of Jewish philosophy went out with Newton, with the scientific revolution. But the power of Yehuda Halevi, the power of the Rambam, the greatness, the comprehensiveness was so powerful that it entered into the stream, and we're going on the momentum of medieval Jewish philosophy. But look, when I went to school, they used to say, oh, the word physics was coined physis in Aristotle, and that was the last you heard of Aristotle, because, what has Aristotle got to do with modern physics? Nothing. So, there's a problem here of this. Okay, so come back to the basic point. The first point is bara is a verb. It can in principle carry two different meanings. They're not just a matter of semantics, as I'll show a little later, and therefore it's paradigmatic for every verb in the text. The reader has to decide what you want to get across. Or you're leaving it to, and one of the big points is that it's built, the reader asking questions is built into the grammar. It's not coming as a separate inquiry, like if you read the word he created, and then if you're interested, you raise the question and you pursue inquiry. Here, it's built into the grammar because the story is being looked at from the present, from where the reader, from the writer. It's not being looked at from the past. Now, one of the things that got me crazy in the last 5 weeks, it's already 9 weeks, I'm on a creative high that's unbelievable. Because Yerushalmi, an old Israeli professor, he passed away recently, he was at Columbia, and a history professor, he took the Baron chair. I studied with Baron, incidentally. But anyway, he wrote a book called Zachor, Memory, and what he discovered was, and wrote, and became world-renowned, it's a world-renowned piece of book, 200 pages, whatever it is. He showed that historiographically, what we were doing was looking at history from the point of view of the time. We were saying, we took our stance as everything happened in the past. Now we're going to try to understand it. As it happened, in the context of its happening. Meaning, he didn't use the variation. What he discovered was that there's a place to shift the paradigm of history writing and historical study to include in it the different meaning. And so that's a big, fantastic blitz right now, a big blitz on the notion of history. The notion of history, which relates to the notion of time, we'll get to it right away. But the point is that he made a big hit, and that his work dovetailed with the things that I was talking about and where I got them. So we have an unbelievable thing in history, that there are, not only him, there are a number of different scholars, top-notch, high-level people, who in our time you could say it's like a conspiracy. It's a co-joining of ideas that came in from different fields of study, but are basically organized around the notion of time, which we'll talk about right away. So there was Levi Strauss, the great anthropologist. He just passed away recently also. He lived over 100. In his work, he spent a lot of time on the primitive mind, how they thought, and so on and so on. And so you had an anthropologist. Then you had D'Olivet, the book that I use, which is the basis of the Egyptian basis of Hebrew, of biblical Hebrew. You had a philologist, a grammarian. And when you read his material, you see the exemplification of the same points, and you'll see it right away. And then you have the two. You have my Bible is there's a guy, Johannes Pedersen, Israel, Its Life and Culture, 1926, which has been drowned out of the scholarship field. Like, things happen in scholarship that shift the thing, and the student has to now, you can't just come in and say, I want to read Pedersen. That's not the text. We're not doing him. Pedersen was a Danish philologist who entered the text, there's 2 volumes, entered the text from the point of view of, like an anthropologist, entering the text and trying to capture what the basic concepts were, nefesh, neshama, time, space, and dealt with how they thought and so forth. And so this is the book. I never let it out because I make sure I get it back. It's been reprinted a number of times. And so in the book, I'm going to read a little bit, 1-2 lines from the book to just use the illustration. So for me, he's dealing with ancient Near Eastern text, nothing to do with Torah. And he's coming in, he was a Dane, and he wrote in Danish, and this is an English translation. And his book is, I read it 15 times. I mean, you can't let it go because anything you touch is a topic. It has an index. You look at the index and you talk about man-woman relation. Okay, got it. It turns out that when you study the text from something like this, it's a totally different world. It's a totally different world. For example, as we'll get right away, they did not have the concept of history and the concept of time as we have it. They did not have the concept of logic. They did not think in logical terms of a subject and a predicate and connections between those in propositions to make an argument. Until Aristotle formulated what we call logic, in syllogistic logic, there was no logic. Plato did not have logic. He thought in logical terms, but the task, the job of formulating, of formalizing the system of what is logic was left to Aristotle, who was the first systematizer of the notion of logic. The notion of logic, formulated first by Aristotle, until today, until symbolic logic, that was the dominant view. Today, we have moved into what's called mathematical logic, since Frege, Russell, and the other greats who put this through. So there was an advance on the notion of logic and the notation, different aspects of logic, not important for us for now. But the beginning of that was in the Greeks, where Aristotle formulated the concept of logic. And we read Pedersen, he said, look, they didn't have a concept of logic. Well, if you enter the text with our conception of logic, without thinking it through, just saying, well, that's, of course, that's it. He created. It has a verb and a noun, it has propositions, right? It makes assertions. It's a book full of assertions. Assertions are true or false, and they have to have a subject and a predicate, and so that's the language. Well, just like I said about bara, about the verb, you're not reading this text. Because this text does not operate, does not function with what we call logic. Now, by the time the prophets period of 800 BCE, there was already much more impact from the Greek orientation, and there was a change in the dominance of language. Assertion became the paradigm of knowledge. You make assertions, and you put them into argumentative form, and this was the orientation which then, quote, was up to date, modern. And what was discarded? Well, there are 3 basic uses of language. One is assertion. You assert something. You have a subject and a predicate and so on. You assert. Another one is command. You make commands. And a third, most important, that you've heard me for years already, is the performative. Performative utterance is, it's John Austin and Wittgenstein, the performative utterance is a use of language which bestows statuses on things and on people. The primary example for us as Torah people is the halacha, which is built on the fundamental notion of what's called chalot, in Hebrew chalos, and in the Ashkenaz version of chalosin, namely Rabbi Baruch Ber in his book on halacha, he was part of the brisk tradition. He says, look, in his introduction, he says, the halacha doesn't deal with chairs, tables, cows, and chickens. The halacha deals with chalos, with statuses on things. It has a status, and the status has implications, has consequences for action, and on the other hand has conditions. Like if a katan, 2 years old, says, Harei ha'mekudeshet li, I try it on the tape. My grandchild says that, I try it on the tape. So I don't say he didn't do anything. But the function of those words is nothing. Yeah, he didn't say anything. Halachically, he didn't say anything. Because the halacha is that the one who says, Harei ha'mekudeshet li, has to have enough seichel das to understand what the words mean, and so on, so on, so on, so on. Okay. As you know, kids in the yeshiva play all the time. A 10-year-old girl or a 10-year-old boy, he comes, Harei ha'mekudeshet li, we're married. I mean, but this is the point. So there was, and there still is, in every legal system, the notion of a performative. Namely, an ability of the human being, how it's done, what it works, I don't know. But it has functions, and we can talk about the functions, and in jurisprudence and philosophy of law, and in understanding, the deeper understanding of the halakha, one has to look at the material from the point of view of statuses, and their interrelate, the conditions for making them, and the consequences of once having made them. The person is the same person, basically speaking. He had a little change, he took a haircut. Fine. One day before he got married, he had a big mop, and the next day he took a haircut. Fine. Well, relatively speaking, it's the same person. Sure, there are changes all the time, but during the day, how much can change? Did he gain 20 pounds? I mean, he took a haircut, he dressed up, he went to the chuppah, and he got married. But once he got married, he was no longer Joe. He was no longer, quote, a man. He was a married man. Married man is a legal status, a halachic status on the person. And that's what we deal with. I generalize that to everything in ordinary society. I generalize that simple example from a legal system to the society at large. Namely, there are no objects. There are no things. It's against common sense because you say, what do you mean? There's something here. There's a person, there's a thing, there's a body, there's a thing, there's something. It's the status doesn't go on nothing. But the status becomes the thing. The thing is now, the bodily thing is the carrier of the function. It's not for tonight, but the point is that we're talking about the functions. And in the functional picture, that's what it is. So I generalized it to the whole of society. That all of society is dealing with people with different statuses. And the statuses change over time, and what in one context is a condition for a status, in another context is a consequence, and vice versa. And the complexity of studying any legal system, and especially the halakha, is to understand the interconnection between these performatives. And Reb Chaim Olav Shalom made the point, which was very important, we are dealing now with if-then relations which have nothing to do with causality. When you go in common sense and say, oh, he got married yesterday, and how do we know that? Because he said this, he did that. You put it in causal terms. There's no causality here. There's no causality. There's causality of the body, of the things that are sensible, the speech and everything. But the function remains in if-then relations, purely in logical terminology, and not in causal terminology. That's very, very important to understand. That when you have and you work with these things, these statuses, the interrelation is logic or mental, exists in a mental space, however you want to characterize it, but not causal. Okay, so now, come back to the point. So the basic point is that in Moshe time, assertion was not the paradigm of knowledge, and therefore they had no logic. It waited to a later time in history. What they did have was the performative. So now you could ask, for us that sounds crazy. How are you going to have society? How are you going to communicate one to another by performatives? How are you going to do that? Well, there are performatives that come in from somebody else and makes a status, bestows a status on something, or a legal system bestows a status, or a bezdin, or whatever. And there are also self-imposed, self-bestowed statuses that the person bestows on himself whenever he talks in first-person language. It may sound like assertion, but it may be a performative. And that's our next point. Vayomer. Okay? It's, Bereshit bara Elokim et shamayim va'aretz hayta, hayta, tohu. Hayta is a verb. Question again is was. We mean was or had been. And so the same point, and it's not for tonight, but you can make an analysis of what the difference makes a difference in understanding the text of hayta. How are we supposed to understand that? It turns out that it was that way, and it has the notion of had created, and not the pure verb in the past tense. Okay. Vayomer Elokim Yehior. Woohoo! Vayomer, he said. Okay, Vayomer Elokim, God said, Yehior. What kind of language is that?
Performative.
It's not a performative. He said. He said. What kind of performative?
Oh, okay. Assertion.
Assertion, of course. That's been the translation for centuries. He said. And yours truly, who's trying to do something about his own ignorance, accepted for 50 years that it's an assertion. But how do you say declared? How do you say I declare? Ain't no word in Hebrew. The word said includes in it a performative. To declare is to say, like in a legal document or on the street, I declare, and then you give the content of the declaration. Declaration of Human Rights. They print it, Declaration of Human Rights, and in the beginning, we hereby declare, and there's a legal format usually for all of these things. But the point is that the word Vayomer in the text is either an assertion or a performative. It could carry both, the way how you understand it. If it's translated, he said, then it's an assertion. But if it's translated, I declare, he declared, Elokim declared, Yehior or Yehior. Well, it says the next words to prove what I just said. Remember, we're dealing now with the language at the time. So at the time, since their basic language was performative, they were more sensitive and proposed. They knew what it meant when they said Vayomer Elokim. That it was a performative and not an assertion. We don't have a tape. We don't have a video. We don't have how they pronounce the words. You could say Vayomer. You can say Vayomer. You could put it in 2 syllables. I guarantee if we knew the anthropology of the system, we would see that they did communicate. They had communication, and it was not necessarily by assertion. I even speculate that in anthropology, many cultures don't talk as much as we do. They do things, but they're not. We're a talking society. Yeah. Well, think about it. We're here. You can have a working society. No, they don't. They just come in the boker, time to do. They go and they do their work, but they're not talking so much. I guarantee that if we had the material, we would see fully worked out in this ancient Near Eastern text and the life that it's reflecting, we would see how the performative was operating. And so body language, you don't have the body language. So for us, it sounds crazy. Joe Levinson comes along and says, well, it means performative. Well, it could carry, I declare, or not. Well, I've been using the Alaveh book for 50 years, okay, on the Egyptian basis of Hebrew, biblical Hebrew. Ignorance is bliss. And sure enough, I read it, God knows how many times, and I talked about it. You know this? I never looked at his translation. Here's a linguist, the Alaveh, 1814, 1815. How does he translate the text? And God declared,
Oh, he did.
ignorance! I'm using the text for 50 years, and I never read it. I never looked at the word, and when I looked at the word, of course I read it, but it didn't register. It didn't, he says declared. Did I think that there was a problem here? He's a linguist, so he put the word declared. Did I catch the point? I didn't make that point for 50 years. Once you make it, coupled with the first one, and coupled with the second one, well, we got a revolution. We got an eye-opener that just like it hit me, it's got to hit you. Because we're talking about this. And what's the proof that it's a performative? The next words are, Vayomer Elokim, Yehi Or. Yehi is a performative word, like let there be Hegdish or whatever. Yehi is a performative language. So the very next word in the text, Lo B'Mikra, the brilliance, the greatness of the text, fantastic. The very next word says a performative, which tells you that the meaning of Vayomer was a performative. I declare. Hashem Elokim declared. Yehior, and then the other half Vayior, and then one of the two psukim, and then he called it the light day, and so it's not important for the moment. But the point is, without a lot of words, the very fact that it says Yehi, right immediately, that's immediately, verse 3, immediately after Vayomer means that Vayomer over here means Elokim declared. Now, if that ain't fingerprints, then you got to remain in jail. But I was ignorant. So much so that I'm just showing you the power of the ignorance and the bliss that goes with it. The power. I didn't read it. I read the word, but it didn't register. It didn't. Here's a guy who translates it. Why didn't I catch it then? I could have caught it 50 years ago when I started using the text, the book. So I said, well, like on other things, I don't just buy whatever he says. I don't think he's got the full picture. When he deals with grammar, he deals with language, that's one thing. When he deals with concept, we have differences, and I marked them in the book, and so on. So I was concerned with me, the differences, and how do we argue against them, and so on, and so on, and so on. So I put a lot of work in, but the simplest thing, that's a revolution in understanding the text, I didn't catch. Pure ignorance. Going on the momentum. Pure ignorance. Okay, so here we see Vayomer in Pasuk 3, the first Pasuk, is a performative. Yehi is a performative. And then the other half, right off the bat, it says Vayehi, and it was. And that what was, we're not going to spend the time on that, but the point is to understand how we're to look at that. That's a verb. So are we to look at it again like we said bara or not? It's not important for tonight, but the main point is to get across that Vayomer carries the meaning of I declare, or he declared, or whatever. It does not mean assertion. And of course, since I took it as assertion, well, assertions have to be true or false. You're predicating something of a subject. Here's a subject, Elokim, and you're predicating what he said. So, of course, my first problem was, what does that mean? What do you mean? He's not a human being. I said, we were taught. So what does it mean? And of course I went to the Rambam, who spent time on the same question and dealt with the Hashem and Elohim language with different words and what they mean. Okay, so this is where you go. And of course, my lifetime was spent on trying to understand the truth or falsity of the words in the text as assertions. A performative is neither true nor false. It is, that's all. What are you going to say? The guy got married, this is the formula to do it, he did it, he finished, that's the end of the story. So I generalized it, and at that time, as I said, if we had a video and we would see the hand movement and the body movement and everything else, when somebody said Amar or Vayomer or whatever, everybody would know that he's talking declaration talk and not assertion. I'm not arguing that they had no assertion. They surely had assertion, just like Plato had assertions, and Plato had logic, but he didn't formulate the logic. He wasn't on top of it to say, here are the rules of the structure. There's a big difference between using something and catching and taking as a subject matter for inquiry the structure of that, the categories, the basic components. Well, that was Aristotle's logic. I mean, but that doesn't mean nobody thought before Aristotle. Nobody thought in logical terms. I mean, people didn't walk around and have all kinds of crazy words and sentences with no meaning or with strict contradictions. Sure, but it was actional and not conceptual, where they had a formulation of the view. So when I say, for example, that there's no logic in the biblical world, well, okay, they didn't think the way we did. How did they think? A guy made a self-bestowed performative. I am Jewish. Well, looks like an assertion. Because one of the difficulties is that assertive language and performative language can be switched. A little intonation, a little switch, and it looks like an assertion. But it also could be a declaration. In the middle of a conversation, which has all three uses of language, if you look at it, take snippets of conversation, slices of conversation, any conversation you want, you will see there's part assertion, and then there's advice, command, and then there's performative. In the middle of a discussion, somebody said something, in the middle of a conversation, and a guy, I'm Jewish! Well, it could be he wasn't making an assertion. Depending on the body language and how he spoke, he was saying, that's me. I'm Jewish, and that's a status that I put on myself. Or I'm a wealthy person, or whatever the status happens to be. So the point is, we have this, just think of making performatives on yourself, and they are connected to a package of associations that go with whatever you said. I'm a plumber. So when you say as a declaration, there's a package of assertions, a package of statements, of meanings, of things that are done by plumbers, which are associated with the performative. And argumentation went not by logic, but by association. You associated with the performative on the person, the status, you associated certain things that came in from society. He gets up 5 o'clock in the morning, blah, 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 blah. And these are packages which are always changing, being added to and subtracted from, but they basically give you the ability to logicize by dealing with association. Not logic, but association. You read Patterson, so he'll tell you, oh, they didn't think the way we think. They thought in terms of these association packages. Okay, so if we just look 1 minute on time, the rule of sun and moon consists in their governing time. That's what it says in the Pasuk. It does not mean that they are used to measure distances in time. For the Israelite, time is not merely a form or a frame. Time is charged with substance, or rather, it is identical with its substance. Time is the development of the very event. Time means daytime, nighttime, sleep time, relation time, blah, 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 blah. There is no such thing as time, the way we use it, as a container that in which events fill the events. Container conception of time does not exist for the common sense world of the Moshe Rabbeinu picture. Time is not the point. We talk about measuring time. The colorless idea of hour. Measuring time in a purely quantitative way is far from the old Israelite conception. That's not me. That's an anthropological entry into the ancient Near Eastern text, which is the Bible, which is the Chumash. So he's telling you what we think is important. Like I always was puzzled on the length of how long the guy lived. The guy lived 200 years. Well, what are you talking about? Sarah couldn't have children. Okay, she had she stopped her menstruation. She was 50, whatever it was. Well, I was concerned with measurement, with quantification, with how long did the guy live? We're concerned with how long we're going to live. Well, that's not here. That's not the focus. So he writes something like that. One more little piece here, 490. Okay. History is not considered a long chain of events divided into special periods. It is true that one reckons with periods, but in that one sees the experiences gathering around a special feature which pervades the whole important event or a prominent man. Again, that which characterizes the Israeli conception of time is thus not so much the distance, the duration, as the substance and context of the events. The conceptions of time and space are uniform. In both cases, it is the question of wholes which are not sharply outlined, but determined by their character and quality. Like space, time also forms a certain centers around which the totalities are ground. The point is, there is no time as we understand it. And what was striking is the point I started before. So here's Yerushalmi, a historian. Okay? Here's Pedersen, 1926, an anthropological entry into the text. Okay? And then there's Heidegger, whose main book was Being and Time. And Heidegger discovered, by an analysis of the history of metaphysics from the Greeks on, he discovered the fundamental basis of metaphysics, whatever it is, was the notion of time. Not telling time on a clock, but what we can be called temporalization. In other words, what we said about the verb is time in the sense of temporalizing it. Instead of keeping it static, it's being made dynamic by this procedure of the grammar shifting the focus to the now, to the present. That's what's called temporalization. So here we had linguist, anthropologist, historian, and a philosopher, all making the same point. Relationally speaking, each one in its context, each one of 4 or 5 different fields. Add Levi-Strauss, Freud is included as well in the unconscious, and what you have is unbelievable, an uncanny thing that happened in contemporary history, in the history of ideas, in the history of intellection, that 4 or 5 different fields came together and are basically saying the same thing with significant differences, of course, because each one is coming from a different field, but one could put them together in a package. In a package. So much so that when I came to it, b'mikra, it's not important for now. When I came to Heidegger, I hadn't looked at him 18 years. It says in the book, when I read it last, 18 years. Wow. Woohoo! 18 years! I'm still ignorant, but I learned a lot in 18 years. But, okay, so when I saw the Heidegger stuff, my excitement went crazy. I said, maybe there's metaphysics before the Greeks. So I've been working for 9 weeks or so now, a little over 2 months, on trying to find, or answer the question, is there metaphysics before the Greeks in the Chumash, in the biblical world, 1300 BCE? So I started to organize the book. The creative high was I wrote 80 pages in 4 or 5 weeks. I couldn't read. Every time I read a line in Heidegger, I went to the machine because the thoughts came into my head like fire, unbelievable. And what did I write? Either I wrote on Heidegger or I wrote on Torah. What came into my mind were different things. Baser Echad, Ezer Connecto. What are these metaphysical insights or these normal insights? Is it a metaphor? Baser Echad, is that a metaphor for intimacy? Or does it have other dimensions? So I said, when you start to analyze more carefully, you see it's not limited to intimacy. For example, we say, I got lost in her arms. That's what it's called. And what was Heidegger's method? Heidegger's method was to go to ordinary language and to make constructions from ordinary language and other constructions which carried a package of meanings that fit into this whole metaphysical picture of temporalization. So I'm doing the same thing. I say, take the colloquial language, right? And so I got lost in her arms. Well, that's not intimacy. Yes, it is. It's a metaphor. If Baruch was here, he'd bombard it through metaphor. But it's more than metaphor. It's a characteristic of space.
It's metaphic.
Metaphic, right. It's a characteristic of space, namely, that there's space in a big conceptual as extension, and then there's space carried by colored patches. If there was no color, we wouldn't know where this begins and where the table ends. So there's a colored patch of white with thing, which then allow me to differentiate between this locus of space and another locus of space. If it was colorless, weightless, no sensitive properties, space is homogeneous. We wouldn't know where to cut it. We wouldn't know how to do it. So, on a simple illustration, by looking at some of this language, we see, oh yes, Baruch, it's a metaphor. Bing, I stick with metaphor. I told them many times, it's a metaphor, kol hakavod. But there are different ranges of metaphor that are relating to different aspects. But when you tend to say it's a metaphor, you tend to say everything's an intimacy. It's not intimacy. Intimacy is the occasion to say something about the nature of space. There's two different meanings, two different understandings. And that's an important thing to know about space. It's one thing in physics, it's one thing in Descartes, or whatever, where it's pure extension, and he didn't deal with color patches. He didn't deal with how do we get the border.
I'd say it's metaphysical space.
Okay, so I'm saying, so right, okay, so that's good. So either you say, like Heidegger would say, yes, that's a property of the metaphysics, but not a property of the ordinary world. The ordinary world doesn't have that. The ordinary world deals with color patches and so on and so on and so on and so on. And indeed, Heidegger spends a lot of time differentiating between metaphysical talking and scientific talking and normal talking, which are not metaphysical. Metaphysical is a way of talking, a way of thinking, okay, which leaves alone the subject matter of sciences. It doesn't have implications for a science. It could trigger off implications, trigger off ideas, like it did for me. It triggered off new understandings of the Chumash, but it's not, the metaphysic is a way of thinking that runs side by side with science, physics, archaeology, anthropology, psychology, and so forth. It's not one of those. It claims to be the basis, the foundation, the primordial basis. Well, I thought I'm going to find that in the Chumash. After 9-10 weeks, I saw there is no metaphysics in the Chumash. For example, Heidegger makes a big point of the pre-predicative. There are existences that are not put as particulars member of a class. Here's a woman, a person, member of the class, person. So he's the particular. We have the particular and the general. Then we have the pre-predicative. Whatever that means. It's not something that's put in a class. Okay? It's not amenable to being put as a particular in a class, in a set. Okay? It's the pre-predicative. Well, there ain't no predication in the biblical world. If there's no assertion, that's not the paradigm of knowledge, then if there's no predication means you have a subject and an object. That was formulated by Aristotle. In our biblical culture we're talking about, there is no thing like that. So therefore, there is no, how can there be a metaphysics if it presupposes that? It uses the word in itself. A thing in itself. Okay? Big phrase in metaphysics from the beginning. Well, in the biblical world, it's operational definition. A thing is what it does. Operational definitions exclude that kind of a thing. So, you had in a different set of language dominance, the metaphysical notions dissolve. And indeed, in the Heideggerian analysis, he studied metaphysics to dissolve metaphysics. And he wrote a book called The End of Philosophy, because what happened was when he put time, temporalization, at the core of contemporary metaphysics in his system, as he worked it all out, it dissolved metaphysics. There's nothing left. What's left are the substantive sciences, common sense, and organized knowledge. And indeed, what is the problem today? Even in colloquial language, everybody will say the problem is time. We don't understand it in physics and so forth, and so we are dealing with the life system. The number one problem in physics and science today is the life system of the human being. What is that all about? And how do we deal with cognition and all the rest of the characteristics? And the fundamental move that's being made in all the fields, cognitive sciences, physics, string theory, all kinds of developments and speculations in physics, in quantum relativity. There are a number of problems that are left over. And the basic move by everybody in these different fields at the forefront of science is the notion of the temporalization of space and not the spatialization of time. The spatialization of time is built into Einsteinian quantum relativity physics. That's what a great discovery, that he geometricized time. And therefore geometry, without the non-Euclidean geometry, there would have been no relativity, and so on and so on and so on. Not for now to go into the picture. The basic point is, we spatialized time. Therefore we call it space-time. But everybody realizes it ain't going to be good enough to capture the life system. We need something else. And what do we need? We need an understanding in mathematical terms. We deal with mathematical physics. In a mathematics term, we need what's loosely called the temporalization of space, not the spatialization of time. That's the number one problem in contemporary science. The number one problem in contemporary science. And when you look at the Orient, you see that in the Orient and the near Far Eastern cultures, when you read the material, you see that they were, the sniff and the sensitivity was exactly that. How to temporalize all things. And you see it clearly when you read the material, and one of the reasons the West is going to the East is trying to say, can you give us some clues as what we could do to get a science of the life system? Medicine. When we get that science of the life system and the Einstein of biology, we will look at this kufa as the double dark ages. Because there's so much belief that people believe which is absolute myth and nonsense. And we are in the dark age. We will understand, instead of throwing up your hands like Watson did in 1974 in his molecular biology book, Cancer is Trial and Error. 1974! 20 years after the war when the cancer research began and so forth. And Watson says, well, we're dealing with trial and error. That's where we are today. A few inroads here and there. Benji dealing with breast cancer. It's all now in the domain of genetics and so forth. The point being that we'll be able to have a revolution in medicine that will blow the mind. You won't recognize. Historians will look back at this 20th century and say, "My
We're in the
God,
21st century.
21st, yeah." It's the blind.
Maybe you're in the 20th century, but we're in the 21st.
I'm in 1300 BCE. But anyway, the point is, we will have a revolution here that will just be unbelievable when we understand the life system and can build on the life system. Now, this is not a plea to go back to Moshe Rabbeinu time. We can't go back. We can't go back into a society which had the dominance on performative language and so forth. But we can learn from those societies and maybe even discover things, like Kayin says, we may discover things that we haven't touched upon in contemporary science, in contemporary life sciences. Why are we so sure we got it and we're on the right track? It's like Boltzmann at the end of the 19th century, theory of gases, said, well, we're dotting the I's and crossing the T's. That's what physics looks like now. Well, then Planck came along in 1900 and upset the whole story, and there was a quantum world, and Planck said, oh my God, we have to wait in physics till the old timers die and the new generation studies the material. Right out of Planck autobiography. Of course, Boltzmann was not a college professor. Boltzmann was a big guy. Theory of gases, big guy. But for him it was crossing the T's, dotting the I's. Well, are we doing that today? When you examine the material, we are doing that as well. We are blinded to think that Western civilizations got it. We got some of it. There's no science in the Orient, but there are workables. And people in medicine, there's a Chinese medicine book, the classic book, it's in the medical library. It's not for public consumption, but it's in the medical library. I read it. I had a guy from the med school, he got me the book, I read it. But the point is, it's not just a zero. Fringe medicine and so forth is part of where we are today, because we realize that we just can't administer pills, and that's the story. There's a whole realm of material that we haven't tapped into. Okay, and the basic characteristic of that material is, in my language, a simple language without knowing what I'm talking about, because I'm not a mathematician. I don't have the glimmer of what that mathematization would be. I have some ideas, but no rich enough sensitivity to say other than I call it a temporalization of space. And with it goes, instead of geometry being the key, the mathematization in relativity is geometric. Instead of geometry being the mathematization, it will have to be number. There's in mathematics geometry, understanding of space, and understanding of number. Now, how that's going to translate my simple sensitization words into a mathematization, if we had it, go they get a Nobel Prize. Nobody has it, but everybody is tuned in to find it. And when the Einstein of biology emerges, part of what he will have will be this. Up till now, even a guy like Eddington, a big guy in physics, said it's impossible, it cannot be done. Schrodinger, he wrote on the life system in terms of thermodynamics, it can't be done. We're past that. It's not rich enough. It's just not rich enough to capture the characteristics of the life system, especially cognition.
Haven't we, with the discovery of the double helix and that structure, really reached the gap? Because now it's just technologically
It's not true.
engineering the final development
It's not
of
true.
understanding
What's
how the genome is created,
the forefront
and
of the
from there
field, the
protein gets
forefront,
created, and
the
then-
forefront of cognitive science, what they call cognitive science today, is not that. The forefront is what I'm talking about now in terms of temporalization. It's not what you're talking about from the biological. That was a big, tremendous step in the biochemical dimension, in the biological dimension. But the biological dimension that they're dealing with is much richer. Nobody has been able to show and work out a reasonable physics, experimental measurement theory of cognition based on the DNA discovery. We don't have it. It's
So
not,
the other question would
it's
be,
not rich enough.
is cognition directly related to life?
Well,
Or can
It's-
cognition be separate from
Well,
life?
okay, now now these are the questions that are being pondered by the forefront of the field. When we make advances in physics and string theory and so on, one of the things in the back of the head is it going to help us with the big problem? Or unified field. Unified field was left over. Unification of gravitation, electromagnetism, and particle, and so on and so on. It was an unsolved problem. Einstein worked on it, he gave it up, and it still remains as a physics problem. Okay, and then the astrophysics world has come in and so on, but we're still people working on the unified field for theoretical people. Most of the people are in experimental physics, they're not dealing with that. But in the theoretical structure, so they're involved, and in the back of the head is, are we going to say anything that's going to contribute to the forefront? The forefront is the life system. Everybody understood when we went to school, and I went to school, Darwin was supposed to be a big thing. Wow, come on. Come on. You're going to compare quantum physics and relativity with the mathematization to Darwin? Darwin is organized common sense. Organized common sense is not science. Remember, I'm one of the few in philosophy of science who builds on mathematization. And without mathematization, models and empirical relationships are not sufficient. Because if you don't have a theoretical structure that generates what you have to observe, even though we can't see it, nature like plays a game, hides everything. We can't see it. But from a theoretical mathematization point of view, we must find it. It has to be there, otherwise the theory is wrong. So there's mathematization which generates what we look for. Most people today are empirical. They start with a common sense approach and refine it in terms of models and measurement and so forth. And so they're in experimental physics, but not in theoretical physics. The problem of life, which we always thought Darwin solved, come on. That's organized common sense. Like in psychology. When I used to go to a faculty meeting, I probably told you, well, it's great. I couldn't eat, what are you going to do? You can't eat. So there'd be a beer. You have a hat on, you drink a beer. Okay. So holding the beer can in my hand, I would look around. What are you going to do? Can't eat anything. Not kosher. Okay, good. So you listen to the conversations. And this guy's talking about his wife and his daughter and his girlfriend and this guy and that guy and this guy. And all of a sudden, halfway through the evening, all of a sudden you notice one corner is physicists, mathematicians, and the other corner is psychologists, social science. And they stop talking about family and this and that, and talking shop. Well, the twain shall never meet. That's a joke. To call social science science from the point of view of mathematization in physics is a joke. I mean, you're just using a word, and you're way at the bottom of what we would call science. From the Newtonian picture, what was Newton's book called? Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. That was the word for science at the time. Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. And Descartes, who built a whole understanding of the mind-body problem and all the rest of the stuff, started with mathematical type thinking. When he said, I think, therefore I am, everybody knows what that means. I think, therefore I am. The word think for him meant mathematical thinking a la Newton. Not common sense, not anything other than the great mathematization that came through Newton, which was the beginning of modern science. That's incidentally why yours truly, over the years, you'll never hear me talk about science in Greece. There was no science. Archimedes is not science. That's organized common sense. There's no theoretical structure and so on. There was mathematics, but not science as we know it today. Science as we know it today began with Newton, first Galileo, Kepler, and yeah.
I'm going to hypothesize that the next time you bang on the table, that book is going to fall
That
out.
book is going to fall. You don't have to hypothesize, you have to pick it up.
I can't reach it. So
Okay.
it's going to just bang once more and it'll fall off.
Okay.
Let's see. Let's see if
In
I'm
any
wrong.
event, I just want to end tonight. I want to end tonight after getting across this fundamental basic point. I want to end tonight with to show you that this is just not talking through the hat. The names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu,
That's an Alan.
the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu are time terms. The one name is Yud Ke Vav Ke, right? And the other one is E. Okay? Both of those words dealing with the principle, the fullness of the system, never mind theology, those are telling you that everything in our system eventually is a temporalization. And what do we see? The two names of God. Yud Hoveh. Yud Hoveh. Yud Hoveh. Yud means, from the Aleph in the dictionary, Yud means in front of a word, remember, for his grammar,
Future.
you have suffixes and prefixes, one letter, that go before and after the word. So the Yud, before a word, means, like in the future tense, means potential manifestation. That's what it means. You're looking at this dictionary, that's what he tells you. Yud and Aleph also mean potential manifestation, because we say Aleph is also a future tense in the front of the word. Okay, so the basic thing, nobody caught it in the tradition. I was ignorant for 50 years because I said, well, how do we get it? Haya, Hoveh, Yiyeh. Cross out the doubles, and you get Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. And of course, God looks at time from outside the world, and that's what his name is. Oh no, made a big mistake. That's how it's come down. God doesn't look at the universe outside of time. God is inside the universe, logically, and in the Moshe Rabbeinu period. But here, I'm only indicating tonight one point. Yud Hoveh means the potential manifestation of the now, of the perspective, which is the temporalization that we talked about tonight. When I said, what do? When you say had been, you make it relevant from the now. Incidentally, in Heidegger, he uses the word had been, have been, and he makes an analysis in 2 pages. I mean, I'm not going to waste the time going through it, but take my word for it. He uses the phrase has been, and he explains it in light of the rest of his temporalization that he's dealing with. It's not b'mikreh. It's not, I mean, when I said before that four types of things co-join, there's text material. I'm not just giving it to you, but there's text material that he, mafurash, he deals with it straight. So he deals with the whole picture. Okay, so Yud, Hoveh, potential manifestation of the now, and then Ehyeh. It says, I will be known by my name. My name Yud Kei Vav wasn't known to the Avot. El Shaddai had other names, but my key, my essence, my fundamental that you have to understand the world in terms of temporalization, which is the whole picture that we're talking about. It's carried by the understanding of the two names, Yud Hoveh and Aleph Hayah. Aleph Hayah, the potential manifestation of the past. So what we have here, not for tonight to explain everything, just to indicate, to sensitize you to the ignorance that I personally had for 50 years, which now has exploded into a realization how much I missed and how much has to be done to reorganize and restructure one's whole entry into the material that for so many years dominated my whole intellectual life. Of course, one could say, if I found this 50 years ago, well, it wouldn't be Joe Levinson. I mean, to find it 50 years ago...
It would be a different Joe Levinson.
Well, I mean, to find it when you're 20 is not to find it when you're 75. I mean, there's a difference. However, okay, when it comes back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who hates depression, hates indifference, you can't pin me on that. I don't have any depression, it doesn't exist for me. And indifferent? Are you kidding? I mean, I'm up 3 o'clock in the morning to write because it's just bursting forth. In the old days, I was up at night because I couldn't sleep. Because the problems were so weighty, you come dead ends. You know how many years to study and come to dead ends? I went into philosophy for the God problem. My whole life was dead ends. I got a great education. I was a great professor. But tachlis, I went to sleep with the anxiety of not having a solution. And so I bless everybody with the bracha of course, not falling into depression, not falling into indifference, and taking ignorance and saying in effect, Enochinami, never too late to learn. The text as an ancient Near Eastern text. I found out through my study as a Torah person, unless you study and catch the text in the proper way, you can't ask the question, how was it incorporated into Chazal? Judaism is based on Chazal. Whatever you hear from me, no, as far as I'm concerned, Judaism is based on the Gemara, on Chazal. And if you find things that don't fit, one has to have an explanation without apologetics. And if they made a mistake on some empirical thing, they made a mistake on an empirical thing. When they said that the fetus, for example, at 40 days, until 40 days has a din of water, of nothing, so that in the halachic system, up to 40 days, that's not true. That's not true. Well, we're dealing with halacha now. We're dealing with a legal system. If the legal system says it's 40 days, it doesn't have to be a fact. That's the concept that's involved in measurement. 40 days is a big number in the whole Chazal picture, and therefore it's not, the statement is not an assertion that's true or false, that's to be taken literally or not. The statement is part of a legal structure.
This is interfering with the whole system here.
I'm so bad on these things.
You have to answer them, huh?
Well, I don't know.
Just to leave it.
You just have to leave it. I'm sorry.
But can I ask a question? When you say 40 days is water, you mean the fetus, the embryo,
right,
is for the first 40 days of pregnancy is considered as water, and therefore can be flushed out. Yes?
Whatever the halachas are, but what I'm trying to say is that when there are factual discrepancies.
No, well, I was trying to get the halacha.
But the halacha is that it has water. It has no status as if something happens to the mother or something, whatever the different circumstances are, whatever it is. I don't think it has any status whatsoever about.
And where do we find
there's no burial. If there's a fetus and a how do you say had created in Hebrew?
Hayabara?
Ain't no word. There ain't no word. In English we have he did something, he had done, or he has done, and so on. We have I think they call it past perfect, or whatever
True
it
perfect,
is.
past perfect.
Whatever it is in the English thing. But in this text, every verb in the text has the two meanings. Either it means the past tense, he created, bing, or he had created. What's the difference? You'll say, well, look, what are you're chopping wood here. It's semantic. The message is something happened. Kodesh Baruch Hu created. That's the message. That's not quite true. What is the difference between the two? Between created, which could be any word throughout the text, created or had created.
It's easy.
What's it?
It happened. If it had created, it happened before some other event.
That's not the essential point. That's true, but the same thing happened when you write he created. It happened before some other event. To make it short to the point, when you say had created, you're looking at the text from the present now. And so you're in effect saying what was done then continues. It continues. If you want to say it was done and over with, you say he created. And if the person is interested, he could ask a question. What happened before, what this, all kinds of questions about what happened, about the event. But that has to come from the person. Here, HaKadosh Baruch Hu hates depression, indifference, and ignorance. This evening I'm going to talk about ignorance. Not in general, in particular, my ignorance. Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. The first verb in the Chumash text is the word bara, created. I'm not concerned tonight at all with giving an explanation of the Bereshit, what that means, what the word bara means in the lexical sense. It means create, what kind of create, and so on. As you know, there were three words in the story, in the narrative. There was bara, yatzar, and asa. Three different words for making. And I talked about that in a different context. But tonight, I want to focus attention on something else. Bara, the first verb. Okay? We have to talk English, so we say, strictly speaking, Bereshit bara Elokim. The verb is coming before Elokim, but in English and in Greek and so forth, in the Greek Septuagint is theos, God. So that the first word is theos and not thing. And of course, Chazal fasted because they realized that the language shift to Greek was necessary because of the situation of the Jews at the time, Alexandria and whatever it was, but the whole text was completely messed up by the translation. And as you'll see tonight, my ignorance came from following the tradition and how they understood the text. Bara, God created, so we'll put the God first. Elokim created. That's the translation. The grammar disallows the person to raise the question from himself. It built into the grammar is the significance of this act, of what happened. So, every single verb in the Chumash is amenable to a decision by the reader when you want to say he created, he walked, he swam, or when you want to say he had swam.
Has swum.
Whatever it is.
Not had, has.
So the point is, the first point is to realize that this is the case. Why do I say ignorance? My ignorance. Look how many years we're working on the same pasuk. Everybody knows, Bereshit bara Elokim. I wrote a 950-page perush on the Chumash, and I never even entered my head that there was this difference. So the text is telling you, when it's translated into English, it said, Bereshit bara Elokim, God created the beginning, and created the heaven and the earth. Okay, so I took the emphasis to be created. I was interested to understand what happened and how it happened and whatever. So from inside me came a barrage of questions, which have spent a lifetime working on those questions and trying to teach them and get across points, get feedback, and so on and so on. Okay, but the basic translation that I used was the translation in English. English has the other locution. It has the notion of had been. Has been, had been, and so on. This is between the two, whatever it is, but they had the variation. But nevertheless, in the language, they didn't use the variation. You look at the German text, you look at the Danish text, you look at the Hebrew text, you look at the French text, all the translations are taking the verb in the one form. And since in Hebrew there is no special word, therefore the concept was there. They had the idea, and it was fundamental, as I'll show you right away. But they didn't have a word. Therefore, it's built into the word, which means the reader, to get the message, must make a decision on each time it says the word. Right off the bat, we need a new translation of the text. Before we even go further, to give you other illustrations of different type which lead to the same conclusion, we're studying Chumash, working on the text, and we're working, not catching the fullness of what's going on. The point being, it's not just semantic. It fits the whole pattern of thinking and understanding that's built into the ancient Near Eastern text, which is called the Chumash, or Torah. I don't even use the word Torah because we're not talking about Torah. We're talking about an ancient Near Eastern text, which, as far as I'm concerned, does not have any status of Torah until Ezra put the status of Torah on it, and then it entered into Judaism. Judaism has nothing whatsoever to do with the text, except when the text was incorporated. Should I put it the other way around? The text has nothing to do with Judaism. When the 5 books of Moses was incorporated with the other part of Tanakh into the Chazal's understanding and structure, which was Torah Shebiktav and Torah Shebal Peh and so on and so on, then and only then, as far as I'm concerned, it became Torah. Until then, it was an ancient Near Eastern text, and when the scholarship for 200 years have been studying the text, Judaism is never afraid of historical inquiry, linguistic inquiry, and history, and so forth. But when they studied it, we're not afraid. But they got so many boo-boos, so many mistakes that grew up in opposition to the study of the